the fact that the messaging is on point cannot be questioned. What we have to look at is ultimately what the likely outcome is.
So now let me
yes.
add to that. Okay, or maybe after him. Yeah. Let me
no, so Deepak Shetty, just listen to my question. Now you've got these interns who come to the big 500 companies. These are interns you didn't necessarily want, but now the government is paying for them and you're kind of trying to play along. So you say, okay, aajao. How do you ensure that they are gainfully employed for 1 year and that they actually acquire the skills? We've seen in the United States, for example, when such incentives were given, a lot of fudging happening, and if it happens in the United States, in India, jugaad goes into extreme levels, right? So how do you ensure they're actually getting skilled, they're not just taking the funds from the government and not getting the skills?
I'll answer both your questions.
Yes.
I'll give a specific example for the first question that you had. We had during COVID time set up a factory in Vadodara, completely export oriented factory, focused on hardcore manufacturing. We recruited people from young team members, 18 years age, from ITIs of Gujarat. But the skills that they had were not good enough to allow them to weld components. We set up a facility with AR, VR technology. We used to put them through the training for 3-4 months, and after that they start production. The beauty about this scheme, as Mr. Vallabh rightly mentioned, is you can create a stream of people who you don't need to put on the job, but you can continuously train. So they acquire that skill, and when they are ready, you take them in. Today, your company, you have a large pool of people who are not contributing to the actual job, you are spending time in training. So this big need is addressed. The second point I wanted to make, for the industry to grow, if the MSME sector does not have the right skill sets and MSME sector does not grow, we will be the assembly capital of the world, will not be the manufacturing capital.
Okay, so you're providing a pool for the small and mid companies, that we totally understand. But let me ask you this question, Mr. Puri. Now you've got these interns, they come to you, everybody wants to come and intern at Hindustan Unilever. How do you ensure, how they intern at ITC, how do you ensure that they are gainfully engaged, that they actually acquire skills? Because you will have to leave a certain amount of bandwidth to try and deal with these interns who the government is paying for.
No, so internship and training are well-established processes in organizations, and there is capacity to train more people, and it can be done. And they will of course be, properly mentored and gainfully employed, etc. All that will happen. But I just want to come back to this earlier point that you've been stressing on how do the jobs get created. Now let me just build on what I thought, just building on the anecdote that Mukundan said. See what happens if your project gets delayed. If a project is delayed, by the time the project gets into production, the lead time increases. So once the project gets into production, the economic opportunities start arising. If it's get delayed, it is later, right? How often have we heard from MSME sector that I now have orders, but I don't have the people to fulfill? We have heard it in our ecosystem. So there is this unmet need also that we must recognize, and I think that is where much of the benefits will come from.
But here's a real concern. One, the potential for misuse based on what happened in an advanced economy like the United States. So much reportage in America on how the incentives were misused. If it can get misused in the US, the chances of misuse in India are higher. And secondly, how do you ensure that during that internship, the youngster who comes to you gets the bandwidth from people at the lower levels of management to actually acquire the skills that Mr. Mukundan's company will later require potentially?
So I think there's one important thing that happens in that 1 year, and that is you train and you give him a certificate, which is the government norms, the NCVT certificate. That itself increases mobility, his job opportunities, and that 1 year gets utilized. You've seen all surveys of all large and mid-sized companies and small companies saying that we need people and we are not getting the right people.
Sure.
So I think there is appetite to employ more, and there is appetite to even take people. If you take two, one will go after 1 year, it doesn't matter. So this actually incentivizes you to rapidly involve more people in your workforce, for manufacturing companies especially. So that's a big way to go forward and have a trickle down effect when they get trained in that 1 year and get that certificate. But that certificate, which they never get otherwise.
What issues are you to? Sorry, Shari, please.
No,
Thanks. No, I just wanted to make one point. See, we all, as you were also mentioning, we all have internship programs.
Sure.
We have an internship program which is in rural India. We have a program which is a Global Green Scholars internship program. I think what an internship does is it just engages the youth to familiarize themselves with what they're interested in, and in a way, you know, they're getting this sort of competency to go and, you know, get qualified with the certification which CB was mentioning, and you know, become available for sectors like ours, for example, in the renewable space, with the extreme shortage of resources, for us to have this pool of capital which is ready, and obviously private sector will have to invest more in getting them more ready to fit in and to rely on them. But I think it's an introduction in areas and sectors where we need people to come to
The
work.
good thing is it's a big idea. At least there's an idea. Now obviously it depends on the implementation, and that will determine the efficacy, but at least there's an idea that's been thrown out. You want to make a point before?
No, I was just wondering, when you're saying misuse, what misuse were you looking at?
No, so for example, that they were just getting the dole and not necessarily reporting into work and just benefiting from the dole, right?
No, but these are top 500 companies.
Yeah,
right?
no, so I'm saying these are people, because now how much is the incentive on that company to actually make sure
But they're
that
putting
the
it out,
person is
they're
acquiring
putting their
the
name
skill?
out, they're putting their in on the digital
Sure.
portal and everything else. So yeah, there's 1%, 2% chance of everything, but I would say substantively 95% plus should be.
I think India has done better in many areas.
Sure.
I
And
think
technology
so.
leverage
We
will be
shouldn't
high.
benchmark
Yes,
with
Mr.
the
Chair.
US.
Having worked in UK, I have seen this very seamlessly being done there. It was very regular for the company JCB in UK to have a group of people, and it used to be handled. Obviously, you know, there may be some leakages somewhere, but overall it was very positive. And the most beautiful part about is that in India, even today, the college curriculum does not create people so that they can hit the job
Sure.
on the first day. I think this program will bridge that particular gap.
So the broad consensus on the first part of the broadcast is that directionally it's the right move, it's also the right signaling. Ultimately then it is about reviewing how this gets implemented. I want to come now to the second central question, which is to do with investment outlook, and I want to start with Chandrajit Banerjee because we've had this conversation multiple times. Now there is no new research to suggest that yes, private investment, particularly in some sectors like cement, steel for example, is kick-starting. It's not happening for industry as a whole. Capacity utilization as an average is still in the mid-70s, hasn't headed up to 80s, has been mid-70s for a very long time. What's your current outlook on that, and to what extent does the budget address this central challenge of investment?
Yeah, so I mean, we have had government capex-led growth for time, and there has been, but as you said, the private sector has started investing in some of the sectors. If you really look at our outlook, we see more than 70% of the sectors above 75% of capacity utilization. That's what roughly the survey says.
No, but it stayed mid-70s for a very long time.
It stayed mid-70s for a very long time.
Why is it not heading up to the early 80s?
So, it is heading up to more than 80s in many of the sectors. Many sectors have headed beyond 80% capacity utilization. Number one. Number two, you know, what we see also, a trend which is coming in is the entire thing of making it easier to do business. And I think that's very, very critical. You see in the budget also a lot of element of trust coming in terms of looking at the tax structures in the next 6 months. All of that actually enables for any entrepreneur, for any company to take that now plunge into greater investment. Today also, number three, you see a demand factor globally. We are doing well. Actually, we are doing well, even in especially services exports, so to say. So we see even opportunities coming up for scaling.
But the economic survey also speaks of how services exports are likely to be impacted by artificial intelligence, and how the medium to long-term trend is basically anti-service exports, and that whole sector is imperiled because of these global trends. Right?
Yes, the economic survey has been, I mean, it's also talked about very conservative growth rate for India, which is good, that type of cautious optimism. We are talking about an 8% growth. And we are talking about an 8% growth because we see private capex playing a very important role in the months to come.
So CII is projecting 8%.
Yes, please.
Then the government is projecting 6.5%.
Yes, please.
So you know what happened during the elections was that the BJP said, "Ab ki baar 400 par," and it didn't turn out like that. So they've been conservative, as they have been for a couple of years now. When it comes to growth numbers, industry and even the IMF is projecting a more bullish growth number So they are being
But Rahul, if you look at this
financially conservative.
if you look at last 3 years,
Yes.
if you look at BE and RE, RE has always been higher than BE. I think if you look at the first two paras also of the finance minister, I think their basic, as I understand, the basic theme is that you are in a global uncertain era.
Sure.
You want India to be strong. There could be global headwinds because of geopolitical issues. So, and also when you look at investments, you just don't look at GDP growth for this year. You look at what's the strength of the balance sheet. So a lot of focus has been be conservative, build a stronger balance sheet, provide clear direction, so that helps long-term investors to take better investment.
Now, how does this budget and everything that's happened in the build-up to it impact the investment outlook for India, in your view?
So I think the fact that the first theme is that a lot of people they'll become more populist and everything else. The focus remains the same. The focus is on macroeconomic stability. A lot of focus on trying to encourage manufacturing, MSMEs, jobs, which in a way will create demand of its own right, on energy transition, on focusing states and others to focus more on digitization. So if you look at all the themes around this, and even if you look at 7% growth or 6.5%, 7% growth, you compare with what's happening outside, and you look at a gliding path of fiscal deficit from 4.9% to 4.5% and hopefully below 4% in years to come. I think it does definitely give rise to, anyone who's looking at creating new capacity or whatever, that gives rise to that. And on your earlier question which you asked, CB, yes, AI will displace jobs, but to implement AI, the kind of things that you require, right from starting to, building the data layer, building the cloud architecture, doing your enterprise modernization, and if you look at net surplus around the world, you look at scale, you look at cost, you look at availability, you look at quality. This is, so a lot of companies are, and this is why the GCCs are going up and the tech companies, hopefully, the demand will start showing up. But that in itself is a great impetus. So yes, AI is definitely a challenge. We'll have to figure it out. But I don't think it'll impact as much as people think. There's also an opportunity if we can skill right and move right.
Let's spend a moment on investment outlook for companies like yours and from other people that you're speaking to, your assessment of whether India Inc. is now more bullish than it was in the past.
So let me just say this. I think I want to sort of add to what CB has already highlighted. Most sectors are already at 80-85% utilization, and most of them are already investing. If you look at steel actually is a big number, so their number comes out well in front. But if you sort of say that chemical sector, all the sectors, all the companies I know are all investing now. So really we see that the numbers would tend to double at least in the next 5 to 6 years. And if the revenue has to double, our capacity has to double. And the real issue you got to think about are the companies which are doing project execution, which means companies like Tata Projects, Larsen & Toubro, or the capital goods company, is there a waiting list for them? I can tell you all of them are waiting lists.
Okay.